Then the police showed up. It was a quiet morning when I heard the knock on the door. I opened it to find 2 officers standing there. They confirmed my identity, and afterward, one said,
"You're under arrest for theft.
"Theft? What are you talking about?"
You've been accused of stealing property documents from your parents, which are their inheritance.
"I didn't steal anything. Those documents belong to my siblings."
Your parents claim otherwise. They also said they have witnesses who say they saw you entering their home.
That was impossible. I'd never been near my parents' house since I left, let alone stolen anything from it. But the officer's stern gaze told me they believed every word of the accusation. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. Sarah and Daniel. They must have lied to me to cover their tracks. There's no way they didn't lie to me. I tried to explain. I didn't steal those documents. My siblings came to my house and begged me to hide them. The officers barely listened. To them, I was just another disgruntled daughter caught red-handed. And to my parents, I was everything they'd always feared, proof of their belief that I was no good. The officers read me my rights as they cuffed my wrists. My neighbors peeked out of their windows, whispering and pointing as I was led to the squad car. When we arrived at the station, I was pushed into a cell. I never expected to see Sarah and Daniel on my doorstep that day. After all, it had been over a year since I'd left home, and not once had my siblings reached out to me. So, when I opened the door to find them standing there with a look of desperation and guilt, I didn't know what to think. "What are you two doing here?" Sarah glanced at Daniel, then back at me, biting her lip. She looked nervous, which was something I'd rarely seen from her. Daniel, on the other hand, was fidgeting, his hands stuffed in his pockets.
"Cindy, we need your help."
"Help? That's funny. You haven't spoken to me in over a year, and now you're here asking for favors?"
"We know we haven't been there for you, and we're sorry. But this is serious. Please, just hear us out."
I sighed, stepping aside to let them in. As much as I wanted to slam the door in their faces, a part of me still cared and still hoped for some kind of reconciliation. We sat at my small kitchen table, and that's when they told me everything. Apparently, Sarah and Daniel had been saving up for years, working quietly to acquire some properties without our parents knowing. They didn't go into detail, but it was clear they were terrified of our parents finding out.
"Mom and Dad think everything we own is theirs to control. If they find out about this, they'll take it all, Cindy. We'll lose everything."
I frowned because I was confused. What did that have to do with me? It's not like they ever cared about me.
We need a place to hide the documents. The proof of ownership, contracts, everything.
You want me to hide them? Why?
"Because they'll never think to look here. They don't even talk to you."
Her words stung, even though I knew they weren't meant to hurt. "You really think I'm going to stick my neck out for you after all this time?" I didn't expect an answer, and they didn't give me one. Their silence only fueled the bitterness simmering inside me. It wasn't just about this moment. It was about everything leading up to it, every wound and scar my family had ever given me. I was the black sheep, the problem child, the disappointment. That's what my parents always said. To them, I wasn't just a kid making mistakes. I was their greatest failure. Growing up, nothing I did was ever good enough. When I got a B on a test, it wasn't because I'd tried hard, it was because I wasn't trying hard enough. When I spilled milk at the dinner table, it wasn't a simple accident. It was proof that I was clumsy and careless. As for my siblings, according to my parents, they could do no wrong. Both did well in school. Sarah excelled at basketball, and Daniel was great at soccer. But me, my parents saw me as a failure. And when I started acting out as a teenager, stealing from the corner store a couple of times, sneaking out with friends, they didn't see it as a cry for attention. They saw it as confirmation of what they'd always believed, that I was bad. That word followed me everywhere. They used it like a label, an identity they stuck on me so they wouldn't have to look any deeper. They didn't ask why I was so angry all the time, or why I started skipping meals and locking myself in my room for hours. They didn't care. All they cared about was making sure I paid for my so-called sins. Punishments were frequent and harsh. If I stole something, my dad would take off his belt. If I talked back, my mom would scream at me until I cried, calling me names I wouldn't dare repeat. But it didn't stop there. My parents didn't just punish me, they turned my siblings against me too. Sarah and Daniel listened when my parents told them I was a bad influence.
Don't hang out with Cindy, she'll ruin you.
They believed it. They looked at me like I was something dirty, something to be avoided. The worst part was that they weren't entirely wrong. For a while, I was a mess. I was angry at the world, angry at my parents, angry at myself. But I didn't want to be that person. I wanted to be better. When I was 18, I finally made the decision to turn my life around. I stopped stealing, stopped sneaking out. I started focusing on school and even picked up a part-time job to prove I could be responsible. But none of it mattered. To my parents, I would always be the troubled one. And when Sarah and Daniel started making their own mistakes, when they started failing classes and hanging out with the wrong crowd, guess who got the blame?
This is your fault, Cindy. You set a bad example for them.
It didn't matter that I was working hard to be better. It didn't matter that I was trying to rebuild my life. In their eyes, I was the root of every problem. By the time I turned 21, I was completely alone and had moved out of the house. My parents didn't care about me unless they had something to criticize. Sarah and Daniel ignored me unless they needed something. I stopped going home, stopped trying to be a part of their lives. I started going to therapy around that time. My depression and anxiety were so bad that some days I couldn't even get out of bed. I'd sit in my tiny apartment staring at the walls, wondering if this was all my life would ever be. My therapist told me to set boundaries, to focus on myself.
You can't change how your parents treat you, Cindy, but you can change how much access they have to your life.
It wasn't easy, but I started pulling away. I stopped answering their calls unless I absolutely had to. I stopped letting their opinions define me. And for a while it worked. I started to feel like I could breathe again. But after seeing Sarah and Daniel, all those old wounds felt fresh.
We know we've messed up. But we're here now, Cindy. Doesn't that count for something?
I wanted to tell him no. I wanted to tell them both to leave and never come back. But deep down, I still cared about them. Despite everything, they were still my siblings. Just give me the documents. They thanked me and handed me the envelope.
Thank you, Cindy. You don't know how much this means to us.
I didn't respond. Instead, I watched silently as they left. A part of me wondered if I'd just made a huge mistake, but I pushed the thought aside. They were my siblings, after all. For a week, the envelope sat untouched in a drawer in my bedroom. I went about my life as usual, almost forgetting it was there. Then the police showed up. It was a quiet morning when I heard the knock on the door. I opened it to find 2 officers standing there. They confirmed my identity, and afterward, one said,
You're under arrest for theft.
Theft? What are you talking about?
You've been accused of stealing property documents from your parents, which are their inheritance.
I didn't steal anything. Those documents belong to my siblings.
Your parents claim otherwise. They also said they have witnesses who say they saw you entering their home.
That was impossible. I'd never been near my parents' house since I left, let alone stolen anything from it. But the officer's stern gaze told me they believed every word of the accusation. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. Sarah and Daniel. They must have lied to me to cover their tracks. There's no way they didn't lie to me. I tried to explain. I didn't steal those documents. My siblings came to my house and begged me to hide them. The officers barely listened. To them, I was just another disgruntled daughter caught red-handed. And to my parents, I was everything they'd always feared, proof of their belief that I was no good. The officers read me my rights as they cuffed my wrists. My neighbors peeked out of their windows, whispering and pointing as I was led to the squad car. When we arrived at the station, I was pushed into a cell. As I sat in that cold, gray cell, my mind churned with anger and disbelief. How could my siblings do this to me? After everything I'd endured from my family, I had tried to help them, and this was my reward. Still, some small part of me wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding. My parents were probably trying to reclaim what was theirs, and my siblings might have been caught in the middle. But as the hours dragged on, that hope started to crumble. 2 days later, when my parents and siblings came to the station, I finally saw the truth. Sarah! Daniel! Tell them the truth!
We don't know what she's talking about.
The words hit me like a slap. My heart sank as Daniel nodded in agreement.
She's lying. Those documents belong to our parents. We saw her when she was entering our house, but we didn't know she came to steal. We thought she came to take food or talk to our parents, but then we heard that the documents were missing.
I stared at them. I was speechless. They weren't just throwing me under the bus, they were driving it over me. They were telling so many lies. How can you both do this to me? You begged me to hide those documents. You said you worked hard for them and didn't want Mom and Dad to take them. But my words fell on deaf ears. My parents shook their heads, their disappointment etched into their faces.
You've always been like this, Cindy, always taking what doesn't belong to you.
I cried out of frustration and betrayal. I couldn't believe this was happening. No one would listen to me no matter how much I tried to explain. But then I remembered something. My CCTV camera. I have proof! There's a camera at my house. It'll show everything. The officers were skeptical, but I insisted. The footage would show Sarah and Daniel bringing the documents to me, begging me to hide them. It was my only chance to clear my name. The wait was excruciating. It seemed as if Sarah and Daniel were trying to stop the police from going to my house. Finally, the police retrieved the footage 2 days later. The truth was there in black and white. Sarah and Daniel standing in my living room, handing me the documents. Their voices clear as day, pleading for my help. My parents' faces turned pale, their expressions shifting from outrage to shock.
Looks like we made a mistake.
That word didn't even begin to cover it. I was released that same day, but I wasn't about to let things end there. My family had turned my life upside down, and the police had locked me up without a shred of evidence. Someone had to pay. I pressed charges against all of them, my siblings, my parents, and even the police department. I wasn't just fighting for justice, I was fighting for myself. I wasn't going to let anyone walk all over me. The court case was grueling, but I stood my ground. My lawyer presented the CCTV footage, the key piece of evidence that proved my innocence. The judge didn't take kindly to the lies and manipulation my family had used to frame me. It turned out that Sarah and Daniel wanted the properties for themselves, thinking my parents wouldn't notice it was gone. In the end, I won. Sarah and Daniel were sentenced to jail for theft and perjury, and my parents faced charges for their role in the false accusations. The police department had to pay me compensation for wrongful arrest, a sum that was enough to help me rebuild my life. I felt freedom afterward. My family had spent so much time trying to break me, but in the end, they'd only made me stronger. And now, for the first time, I was finally free of them. Thanks for watching.